Hey there, Josh from Bildr here, and in these videos, we're going to go through step-by-step the no-code BildrBot template that you have access to as a Bildr user. To quickly demo this product, you're going to see a ChatGPT-like interface. You're going to see the ability to have your conversation history in the left-hand side. You're going to see the history of your conversations. You're going to see everything from regular conversations to code blocks that get formatted appropriately. The ability to copy messages, copy the code blocks, the ability to create and manage custom prompts for your end users, as well as create universal prompts that the entire platform will get access to. We're going to go through this template step by step to show you how this works, because the hope is that you can take this and build your own SaaS on top of it. You can integrate it into your existing products and businesses to build your own chat interface for your own businesses, for your own companies, and your own projects. So let's go ahead and dive right into the Bildr Studio. So I just opened up this project from the BildrBot ChatGPT clone template. And the best place to start is going to be our homepage over here. Before we get into the flows step by step and what's occurring actually on these pages, I want to talk about what you're seeing overall here. If you're familiar with Bildr, this is going to already feel natural to you. If you're new to Bildr, it might feel a little bit strange for you to see it this way. But our application is a single page app. There's one URL, everything occurs on that one specific page. But when you go to the project inside of Bildr, you're going to see all of the different pages visually laid out in a sequence here that actually build this application. What's going to happen is as we use the application, when we start a new conversation or when we open an existing conversation, we're going to open up our conversation page into this container right here. Or if we click Manage Prompts, we're going to open up our Manage Prompts page into this container right here as well. And then you'll also see our row pages right here in the middle, our prompts row page that's used here on our conversation page, as well as here on our Manage Prompts page. You'll see our messages row page that shows up on our conversations page once for every single message in this list. And then you'll also see our conversation name row page, which will show up in our left-hand menu bar for every single conversation that logged in user has in the application. And so the best part about Bildr is that you get to visualize your entire application inside of a single studio so you understand and can see how everything works together. Even if you were to use multiple URLs, you can get the same exact benefit by laying things out together instead of having to switch page by page to be able to go get that context. So let's go ahead and dive into our home page and talk about the first thing that's going to happen whenever we load up this page. So if we go to flows, and then if we ever search for page load is a flow that by default, you can change it if you want to, but by default, it's the flow that runs every single time a page loads. That's including the page that's your root page that exists on the URL. That's also including the pages that open into your root page. So every single time that you load up a new version of this conversation page, or every single time a prompts row page loads, it's going to run its own page load flow that exists on each one of these pages. So on our page load of our home template, we do two things at first. I'm not going to get into the details. I'll have a video just talking about this later on, but I do this thing called set copy code flow as a variable for my Google Prettify library. If you recall, one of the things that we do is we actually automatically show you code in a code block format with a few things going on, like a copy button to copy that code. And it's formatted in a very specific way with very specific colors. And that's because of that Google Prettify library that we have there. And what we do is here, we're setting our copy action message flow. So that experience of when I click copy, I can run the flow that shows that message there at the top. And that's a message that we use in a lot of circumstances. So when I copied the full message versus when I copied code, or if I liked or disliked the message, all of those things happen for us. And so that's the flow that's running there. And we're basically just saying, this is the flow I want you to run. And then this process allows us to use that inside of some raw JavaScript that we put in a page header that I wanted to show you later on. So in addition to that, one of the first things that we do is we check if the user is authenticated. And that's because we want to know, do we need to go load that user's information, or do we need to ask the user to sign up? And so if the user is not signed in, we're going to show a lightbox for new authentication. We're going to have two workspaces in this project for you, our ChatGPT bot, which is where most of this app content is. And then we've got our user authentication. And so if we jump over to user authentication, you're going to see this is our normal authentication template that's available to all Bildr users. And if we look at this page right here, it's actually going to refer to these two pages as well. There's multiple components inside this page that refer to our sign up with password or our sign in with password pages. When I run that flow, I'm showing a lightbox, which is just a div on the page that pops up that lets me highlight it like a message prompt, essentially. So let me go ahead and log out. And we can see when I log out, I automatically refresh the page. So I refreshed because I'm logged out. It saw that I'm not authenticated anymore. And it went ahead and pulled up the lightbox, which, as we just saw, is referring to this page right here. And it also defaults to sign up with password, which is why we see sign up with password as the first option. The other page that we have here is our sign in with password, which is the one I'm going to use here in a moment. What happens when we actually do the sign up with BildrBot page here, we simply click our sign up button. So our sign up button that goes right here, and that will first disable the button, sign the user up with the password that they filled in. So we pull the email right here, then we pull the password right here, and we create a user with this information. Once that's done successfully, or it will throw error messages if it's not successful, like if that user already exists, for example. But once it is successful, the next flow that we run is actually signing that user in. So sign up and sign in are actually two different actions in this case, but it all happens inside of one flow. Once we actually have that user successfully sign up and then sign in, we go and run our successful new sign up and open app flow, which is actually consisting on this page of a single action that just says, go run a different flow on your home page. So BildrBot, a Bildr chatbot template, is our home page. And what I want to do at this point is just go run this flow that exists over there called new sign up confirmed flow. Similarly, when we're on our user sign in with password, when I click sign in, I don't have to sign up this time, so I immediately go to our user sign in with password action, grab the values from the page. If there's errors, I throw error messages appropriate for the specific type of error it could be, or I proceed to our sign in with password success flow, which then runs the action on our Bildr homepage, existing user logged in. So those are two different flows that we want to run depending on the type of user that it is. If I was, say, building out a more comprehensive welcome flow for a new user, I might have a whole welcome flow. In this case, I just throw a message up on the screen when someone signs up. So let's come over here and see it. And I will go ahead and sign up with a new account to show you that. And then I'm going to switch to my other one. So I'm going to do josh+1@bildr.com. Josh+1@bildr.com. Test 1. Oh, user already exists for that. Let's do Josh+2. There we go. So you can see I say welcome, start your first conversation. And then because this user is brand new, they don't have any conversations yet. They just have the default messages right here. They don't have any of their own prompts. Now, if I go log out, and now I'm going to switch and log into a different account. I'm going to click sign in, do josh@bildr.com this time. And I'll click sign in. And now we'll load up and I'm going to see my conversation history appear right here, showing that these are the specific conversations tied to this specific user. So let's jump back into Bildr and show what actually just occurred. Again, we triggered flows from the sign up with password and the sign in with password function. And then once we successfully sign that user in, we go back to running flows on our homepage of new sign up confirmed flow. And we do a series of things here to deliver the experience that we need to. So first, we pre-cache prompts for the user and the global prompts. This flow is actually going to our prompts data collection in Bildr and setting a variable distinguishing the user's prompts and the global prompts to their own separate variables. Later on, when we get to our conversation page, I'll show where we use this, but essentially we merge these two together to populate this list of data so that we can display all of the prompts that are available. Next in our flow, we hide the lightbox. So we just hide that message that they just typed into. We hide it by removing it in this flow right here. We set a variable called new message, welcome, start your first chat. And then that is actually used inside of our new message show flow. So right at the top here, we've got this little message icon that pops up. Now this message icon, if we look at the styling of it, we need to actually go to its outermost div here. The styling of it has a position of fixed and it's top minus 100%. What that means is it is always at the top of the viewing window of whatever screen it's on, and it's always 100 pixels above the screen. So they can't see it at all. And so when I run this new signup confirm flow, the first thing I do is I just set a variable called new message and I name it whatever I want to. Later on, we use this in multiple ways. And immediately after I set this variable, I run the new message show flow. And what this does is it sets the value of this text in here to the variable I just set. So I get to show any message that I want. And then I reset the style to go from minus 100 pixels, so 100 pixels above the top, to 50 pixels. So it puts it 50 pixels below the top, bringing it into the field of view. These two timer functions that you see here are actually being triggered to, one, if we, for some reason, trigger this flow twice in a row, we stop this timer that we set at the bottom. And this timer is set so that in 2 seconds, interval type being seconds, interval being 2, and repeat being 1. If you left this empty, it would repeat forever endlessly. So we always put 1 right there. In 2 seconds after we start this flow, we trigger our new message hide, which just restores our message div from the top. Instead of being 50 pixels down, it restores it to minus 100 pixels, sliding it back out of the field of view. And the way that we achieve the sense that it moves gradually instead of just appearing and disappearing is because on our div message here, we have this CSS property called transition, and it's set to all .2s ease in out. All refers to what CSS style properties, so top, position, size, height, all of that information can change over time. And by setting the transition to all, I'm saying I want every single CSS property that exists, if it changes on the page, I want that change to occur over 0.2 seconds. And so it creates a set of, instead of something just appearing and disappearing, it creates the effect of something sliding in from its original position, which is out of the field of view, into the field of view, and then eventually out of it as well. And we can demo this really quickly just by clicking some of our other actions that refer to this exact flow as well. And so that's what's occurring when we use this message center, which again, we use directly in those actions that you just saw, as well as in a page header I will show later on. So let's go back to our new signup flow and finish out that process. So we show our message, then we run page binding. We open a new conversation, and we do this action right at the end to set the interaction to make sure that the lightbox can click to close. The reason that we do that is because whenever we have a non-authenticated user, we actually remove this click event on our outer container. Let's go ahead and log out again, and I'll show you this. When we have our lightbox appear, we have two different elements here. We've got what we see here, And then we have another container on the outside. Whenever I show a non-authenticated user, I actually make it so that you cannot click on this background and do anything else. But in a normal circumstance, if I'm using our Lightbox for like a message center, I want to be able to click off of it so that I can get the experience of I don't feel locked into what I'm seeing. Here's another example of that where we reuse the same Lightbox on our homepage from our prompts page whenever we create or edit a prompt, and I can click off of it to close that. And so what that flow is doing when we do this new signup flow, we're setting the interaction so that when we click on the actual outer container of the Lightbox, we can close it right away. And it lets us reuse it later on more easily. So the two of the things that we went over are, that we skipped over to get to that, were page binding and open new conversation. Page binding is a default flow and a default action that exists whenever you start any new page in Bildr. There's going to be page load that triggers, and inside of page load, we also will typically have a nested flow called page binding with this action right here. Page binding is what Bildr uses to automatically tie the correct data to the correct elements on the page that you're looking at. In the element tree, if we ever see any element rather that's purple, it means we've used data binding on it to give it a specific value that we want. And in this case, we have our conversation history and a repeating list for conversations inside of it. Basically saying, I want to see a list of all the conversations that this user has inside this left-hand menu. And so what we've done is under data binding, we've gone to our conversations collection, and we're just doing get all fields. So it's going to give us all of the data in the conversations collection. One very important reason that we can just do an open-ended call like this is because we have locked down the conversations collection to only be accessible by the person that actually created that conversation. So under our database here, we can go to conversations and then click on conversation settings. There's a few things that we've done. One, records get and create and modify require authentication. And then we've also turned on enable user restrictions, and we've turned the access type to be the owner and creator only can access this information. So what that means is we've limited all of our conversations directly to the person that created it, meaning there's no one else in the world that could ever get access to it unless they're authenticated as that user. Now let's go back to our page. So we just data bound our conversation. So in the studio, this is where we set up our relationship of this repeating list to this set of data, these collections. And this is getting a whole set of data and putting it into this element. Now, later on, we'll show on the conversation page itself, what we're actually doing is binding specific fields of value that are in the conversations collection into a specific field on this page. What the repeating list actually does, it's basically saying, here's a big list of data. Will you go create one page for every individual item in that data? And so when I see a list of conversations, it's been given a whole database of information here, and I want it to just sit directly in this repeating list element. And that's what's occurring right here. If we actually go to our inspect element, if you right click, you can hit inspect element. And then if we go to network, we can actually see this in action. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh our page. I'm already authenticated and logged in, so I didn't need to do that. But we can see in our history, if we have this open while we do anything that requires data, under network, we're going to see a history of everything that used some sort of data to run on the page. Now, a really easy way to find out which API call, which is typically anytime you see just a long string here, that's an API call that we're doing to go find data from a specific data collection in Bildr. A really easy way to find calls that are specific to a collection is that ID that shows up in the network tab is the filter set ID underneath a data collection. which is always available here at the bottom right. So if I X that out and I go back to our tab here and I type that in, I can see this is my call that I went to go get the data to set into my conversations. And so I can see the payload. This is the request for this information. And then I can actually see a preview and the response, the raw response itself, which is just a long string of text. And if we look at preview, we can kind of unravel this a little bit more. And so if we go to under object, this is the actual data that we were given whenever we went and asked for these conversations. I can see that there are 4 results in total. It's very important to know that every array, so this is an array of data that shows up right here. And 0 is always the first element in an array of data. And we'll go over later on a specific use case for this, but this is stored in a value called the underscore array index. It is the array index. It's the index of where it sits inside of its array of data, which is what this is. And ultimately, it is really what any repeating list element is. It's simply an array of data that's been told to look like a specific page that we've given it. And so in this case, we see if we open these up, I can see here's my first conversation. I can see that the conversation name is no code tools, and that's why I see that right there. If I open my second one, I can see no code best practices, and I can see no code best practices there. And then so on and so on. I've got my integrations mentor here, and I've got my no code UX mentor right here. Now we do have a specific setting on this array to display it in a specific order. So if we go to our repeating list element in the studio right here, if I go to properties, we can see that I am sorting this specific collection by the field from the conversations collection. So I get the field that from the data collection that I set into it, and I look at the timestamp field. And then I have a sort method of descending on it, meaning the most recent timestamp is going to appear at the top of the conversation all the way down to the oldest conversation. So that's how this is being sorted, and that's how it's getting its data. And ultimately, again, what's actually going to follow these settings, this is basically settings that we've given that repeating list, is that page binding flow. When this action runs, Bildr is doing all of the work to bind any data that you want. So in this case, we do just have one data point. As you build more complex things, as we get into showing how data is being used across all of these pages, you'll see that sometimes you could have 3, 4, 5, maybe even dozens of things. Like say if you had a CRM page, you could have dozens to hundreds of things being data bound. And this single action does all of that work for you based off of how you've set up data binding for your pages. And so that's what's going on with our page binding. Let's go to the last thing that we do in our new signup confirm flow, which is open a new conversation. What our open new conversation does, it's the first thing that we're doing now to show you that experience of delivering this single app page without having to switch from URL to URL. We could do that if we wanted to, but usually when you create an app experience like this, or especially one that carries over to like a really great mobile experience, you're not wanting to re-navigate and load a new page. You're just wanting to bring a new page into context. And so our open new conversation flow that we reuse in a variety of ways in this project is going to go say, I want this conversation page. This page is what we're going to open up. I want this page right here to open up into this container right here. So I've clarified the page and the container I wanted to open up. And then it's really important to know that we're not passing any record context here. So basically, I'm saying, you're a brand new page. You're a brand new conversation. I'm not giving you any information about what you actually are. And in the next video, I'll show you how from our conversation page, we do give that context. And then I'll also walk through in that video how our conversation page knows how to act based off of when it loads up. It checks to see what context and record it's been given. And then that influences its behavior from that point on. So in addition to opening up our new conversation, we also do a run flow on page action, which is going to deselect run this flow on all of our conversation name row pages for Deselect. This is an important thing because we're reusing open new conversation in many circumstances. And in this case, we do it on page load to show basically like, hey, like we're loading up the whole app. But at any given time, we go over here, I can click new conversation and it opens up a page. And it's important to know that when I click new conversation, I don't want this highlight effect to continue to exist right here. So when I click new conversation, one, I open this page, but two, I run a flow on all of our conversation name row pages. I run Deselect. And so our conversation name row page right here has a flow called Deselect that automatically is doing a combination of things, but ultimately it is removing the style class of a selected row. So instead of it being green constantly, it removes the style class that does that, which is our conversion row selected. It hides the default settings area, which is the little trash can that pops up. It hides that from this div so that you can't click it anymore. And it clears the variable selected on this page. And that's important because we use that selected variable when we are selecting a new conversation page actively. We assign selected to it so that we know at all times what conversation page has been selected, and we can appropriately treat that conversation as the selected conversation. And so we'll get into all about how this page operates when we get to it later on in another video, but I wanted to show you how it's used in our new open new conversation flow that triggers right here. The other thing that we do is we run this flow called close mobile menu. And that's because this project is entirely a mobile friendly, and actually not just mobile friendly, this is actually a PWA accessible application. So you can install this to your device and treat it just like a mobile app. And you can install it directly from your browser. So if I close this, I can get a glimpse of what that looks like. If I click right here, I can see my menu pop in. And so what I want to happen when I select one of these, the expected experience of the user is for the menu option to close. And so I click new conversation, and you can see a new conversation just opened up, and the menu closed when I did that. And that's because we have that flow nested in there. So while it's not important for that to run every time, especially when we're in a normal browser view, it doesn't have a menu to close. When it is mobile, I want it to happen. I don't want to have a whole set of different flows to do that. So I just go ahead and include it here. And if it runs without any need to run anything, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the user at all, but it runs at the same time if I happen to be on a mobile view and I've expanded that mobile menu. So that's what happens when we have a new user sign up. Let's look at what happens when we have an existing user logged in. We do the same thing where we pre-cache the prompts for the user and the global settings immediately. We do the same thing. We use the same open new conversation flow. We do the same hide lightbox. We do the same thing where we set the element interaction to make sure the lightbox is closing in the future use of it. And we also run page binding. So ultimately, we're really only doing one thing differently. When our new sign up confirm flow, we are just running our set welcome message for, hey, thanks for signing up, start your first conversation. And the rest of this is actually the same. And let me show you what I would actually do as I'm cleaning this up. I would actually go ahead and just remove all of these, so I don't have the same actions duplicated as much. That's more so long-term maintenance. Nothing got faster because I did that. It's still going to reuse the same code over and over again. But instead, to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to go ahead and just embed my existing user logged in flow right here, because all the actions I just removed are here as well. So when I have a new user sign up, I have them direct here, which shows the welcome message. I have a wait here because I need to make sure when I set this text value, I need to make sure this variable is set first. 99.9 out of 100 times, you would never have an issue if you didn't have a wait there, but sometimes you may. And so the goal is with a wait is you can make sure that this action is completed before the next action starts, especially when that next action is relying on this one to be completed in the precise order that it needs to be completed in. And because we reuse that again to set the value of our message, I need to make sure that variable is set. So that's why we do that right there. And so now I'm going to go again to our existing user logged in flow. All of the things that we just talked about will also happen here. And then the page will be loaded up and ready for them with the new conversation popped up and all of their conversations right here because of our page binding. The next thing to show is at the bottom of our left-hand menu is our account div. When we click on our account, all we're doing is expanding our menu options. So we're toggling a style class every time we click it. If it's not there, it gets added. If it is there, it gets removed. And that experience looks like this. When we click it, it pops up. When we click it again, it collapses. And so it just gives us a way to have one prompt, or rather one click that does the same action every time. It just toggles it. So I don't have to have an add and remove function separately. And then our two menu options are just manage prompts, which opens up our manage prompts page, or log out, which I've demoed already. If you click log out, it actually logs them out of the application. So it removes that specific session as being valid. And then it forces a refresh of the page. So if we go to our log out function, on success of user sign out, I force refresh. And all that does is it opens the href, which is always the entire URL in the browser. It opens that again into the current page. So ultimately just a standard refresh of the page right there. And so while there's a lot of flows that are occurring here, all of these, for the most part, are just referring to one another and working together to deliver what in the end is a few different simple actions that are all very logical step-by-step flows for when our users are actually logged in. I'll show a couple of these other flows later on, like our check for open prompts for PWA install. Our actual show the PWA install is another prompt, the actual open the prompts for it. So I'll show that when I do our PWA video. And then we also have a few mobile specific ones. So let me just look at mobile. We talked about the close mobile menu. We also have our show mobile menu slide in, which I did show you actually briefly. We go back to inspect element where I can control the browser side. We set up our, I believe it's 724 pixels. Nope, more pixels than that. Looks at 770, somewhere around there is where we actually do a mobile view instead of the standard desktop view. And so when we're in the mobile view, that mobile show menu is on a click event of this information right here. So both conversations as well as our little menu icon there. That click event expands the menu from the left-hand side so that we can actually see it. And then we can click it again to collapse it. We can select any option to collapse it, or we can click off of it to collapse it. And so if we show you what is actually occurring there, if we go to, let's do our show mobile menu slide in. We do two things. One, we add a style class to our conversation sidebar mobile menu expanded. And it does it on this conversation sidebar element here. So this is the element, and then this is the style class that we're adding. And so if first let's open up this, and then let's click over, oh, messed it up. So first, let's talk about the element that we just added this to is this one right here, conversation sidebar. And as you can see, we outline it for you right there. Now let's look at why this collapses. So if I go to our primary style class, so that's the highest most style settings on this specific element, you can see that the normal things that I see, which is what you're going to see in the studio typically, is all of these settings right here. What its height is, which is dynamic view height, meaning it's always the height of the viewing screen that you're on. Scroll bar behavior is equal to none, so it doesn't scroll by default. It does allow its internal divs to scroll, which I believe this one's set up to scroll. And so that's how this is set up here. But if you see right here, we've got this tablet view at 768 pixels. That's what it is. And at 768 pixels, we change its behavior. We now are assigning it a width of 80 view width. So we're saying we don't want you to be 100% of the width of the screen. We want you to be 80%. That's why whenever we expand that menu, so if I click to expand it, it's 80% of the entire screen. It's not 100%, and it's not just 200 pixels. So it creates what looks like a full menu that opens up. And more importantly, what we do is we set the transform function to translate y minus 100%. Transform is instructions for, here's, based off of all your other style settings, we know you're going to be in this spot exactly on the screen. And in this case, it means you're right here on the left-hand side of the screen. However, we want to translate x minus 100%. So along the x-axis, we want you to move 100% of your size to the left. And so what we're doing is moving it 100% off screen to the left so that our users can no longer see it because we've moved it exactly one width of itself off of the screen. The other thing that we do when we switch to mobile is instead of our position being nothing, which means if position isn't set, it means that that object is just a part of the normal styling of the sheet that it's in, of the web type. So in this case, for example, our conversation sidebar is on the left-hand side of our left sidebar menu. So left sidebar is a div that is set up so that it has a left sidebar and then a main content area. That's what is clarified in columns and columns left sidebar here. This is the mobile menu that's actually hidden on desktop. So when I look at the all default settings, our display is set to hide to none. But when I switch it to our mobile view, I can see I switch it to flex. And that's why in this view, I can see this div right up here. That top menu is actually showing on mobile and it's hidden on desktop. And so that's why this isn't normally here. And normally we're just seeing these two columns, left column and main area right here. Now, let's go back to our conversation full sidebar and show that when we go to mobile, we switch from having no position set to having a fixed position set. And what a fixed position means, it's always going to be the position that we tell it relative to the viewing perspective of the screen that user is on. So whether we're talking about a tiny, tiny phone, or if we're talking about a huge computer, the exact position rather of our object that we're telling this, and this could be any object, it could be a full div, like a menu here, it could be a single line of text, it could be a button. But wherever we've done it, it's going to position itself relative to that and use this as its guidelines. And so when we do 80% width, we know it's 80% the width of the whole screen. And more importantly, when we do top 0 pixels and left 0 pixels, it's telling us we want you to start 0 pixels off the top. So because it's a fixed position, we're going to say we're using our whole viewing angle as the screen. So you're going to start right at the top and you're going to start right at the left. And then finally, we've got two other things. We've got our Z index, which is why at 20, it's being put above the rest of the content of the screen. And so when you use a Z index, by default, the Z index of every object in a page is 0. And the index is what tells us what layer to show things at. If we were a Z index of minus 20, our menu would appear underneath the rest of the content on the page and we would never see it. By making it 20 in this circumstance, it's a higher number than everything that gets shown beneath it. So we're able to see it in priority order of this object instead of the content beneath it. And so we've added that Z index score of 20 here when we go to mobile. We've added top and left to basically say we want you to stay at the top and to the left of the screen. And we've given it a height of 100 dynamic view height as well. Again, maintaining its full screen view whenever we happen to pull it into the screen. It's always going to be the exact height of the page that we're looking at. And so there's a few CSS stylings going on here, but this is how we create that responsive feeling where we have one menu bar to manage and we create our responsive design so that we give the exact experience that we want on every single type of device that we're working with. So that's our home page of our application and how it works on mobile, how it works to open conversations on the page, and how it works to kind of be home base for our entire app. In the next video, I'm going to go over our conversation page, our message row page, our conversation name row page, and our prompt row page. So as a grouping, it's these four elements that really interact with each other that is really driven off of the data that's powering our conversation with AI. It's the history of the conversations that I have. It's creating those records. It's creating the message records. It's sending the calls to the AI and receiving them back, showing them on the page. All of that information is inside of these 4 pages right here. And that's what we're going to dive into in the next video.